Good evening, friends. I welcome to this virtual Holy Rosary. On behalf of A Square, I welcome you all. And before beginning this Rosary, I request everyone to kindly keep their mobile phones in silent mode or vibration mode. Small introduction. The word rosary means crown of roses. Our Lady has revealed to several people that each time they say a Hail Mary, they are giving her a beautiful rose, and that each complete rosary makes her a crown of roses. The rose is the queen of flowers, and so the rosary is the rose of all devotions, and it is therefore the most important one. The Holy Rosary is considered a perfect prayer because within it lies the awesome story of our salvation. With the Rosary, in fact, we meditate the mysteries of joy, of sorrow, and the glory of Jesus and Mary. It's a simple prayer, humble, so much like Mary. It's a prayer we can all say together with her, the Mother of God. With the Hail Mary, we invite her to pray for us. Our Lady always grants our request. She joins her prayers to ours. Therefore, it becomes ever more useful because what Mary asks, she always receives. Jesus can never say no to whatever his mother asked for. In every apparition, the Heavenly Mother has invited us to say the Rosary as a powerful weapon against evil to bring us to true peace. With your prayer, made together with your Heavenly Mother, we can obtain the great gift of bringing about a change of our hearts and conversion. Each day through prayer, we can drive away from ourselves and from our homeland many dangers and many evils. Let's make sign of the cross.
In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Mary's family, the Trinity on earth. It is only natural that the Church rejoices as one contemplates the modest home of Jesus, Mary, and Joseph. We read in the hymn from Matins on the feast of the Holy Family. It is pleasing to recall the humble house of Nazareth and its slender resources. It is pleasing to tell again in song Jesus' hidden life. Jesus grows up in a hidden seclusion to be trained in Joseph's unpretentious trade. The loving mother sits beside her dear son, the good wife by her husband. Content at her loving attention can ease and comfort them in their weariness. We'll start this rosary with a beautiful hymn, Be With Us, Mary.
She
I believe in God,
the Father Almighty, creator of heaven and earth, and in Jesus Christ, his only Son, our Lord, who was conceived by the Holy Spirit, born of the Virgin Mary, suffered under Pontius Pilate, was crucified, died, and was buried. He descended into hell. On the third day he rose again from the dead. He ascended into heaven and is seated at the right hand of God the Father Almighty. From there he will come to judge the living and the dead. I believe in the Holy Spirit, the Holy Catholic Church, the communion of saints, the forgiveness of sins, the resurrection of the body, and the life everlasting. Amen.
our Father,
Who art in heaven,
hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven.
give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us.
Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us, Lord, from evil. Amen. For faith, hope, love, and charity, Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit.
As it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen.
As today is Monday, we will be doing the joyful mystery. First joyful mystery, the Annunciation. We pray for our brothers and sisters suffering from poverty, homelessness, sickness, and discrimination. May they feel the love and care of God through the hand of their brothers and sisters. Help us to become instruments in spreading love, care, and generosity to those in need. For this we pray, dear Mama, to intercede for us. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven.
Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not in temptation, but deliver us, Lord, from evil. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit.
As it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen.
O my Jesus,
Forgive us our sins, save us from the fires of hell. Lead all souls to heaven, especially those most in need of thy mercy.
O Mary, Mother of God and our Mother, we bring ourselves under your loving care. Mary, seat of wisdom,
Pray for us.
Second joyful mystery, the visitation. Mary, our Mother, to us you are an example of immense faith. Pray for us that we may listen to the Spirit and be guided towards growing in faith towards God. Mother Mary, please intercede for us. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven.
Give us this day our daily bread. Forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us, Lord, from evil. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed are you amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit.
As it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen.
O my Jesus,
Forgive us our sins, save us from the fires of hell. Lead all souls to heaven, especially those who are in the need of thy mercy.
O Mary, Mother of God, and our Mother, we bring ourselves under your loving care. Mary, seat of wisdom,
Pray for us.
Third joyful mystery, the birth of our Lord. At times we believers are attached to various kinds of materialistic things, which becomes a barrier in relation with God. O Mother, most holy, pray for us that we may detach ourselves from all those making the relation with God. Mother Mary, please intercede for us. Our Father,
who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread. Forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us, Lord, from evil.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit.
As it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen.
O my Jesus,
Forgive us our sins, save us from the fires of hell. Lead all souls to heaven, especially those who are in the most need of thy mercy.
O Mary, Mother of God and our Mother, we bring ourselves under your loving care. Mary, seat of wisdom,
Pray for us. Fourth joyful mystery, the presentation in the temple. Mother Mary, do intercede for us, for all of us, so that we may surrender our true whole self to you, to the Lord. For this we pray, our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us, Lord, from evil. Amen. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen. O Mary, Mother of God and our Mother, we bring ourselves under your loving care. Mary, seat of wisdom, pray for us.
Fifth joyful mystery, the finding of Jesus in the temple. In the midst of affliction, defeat, and whenever we are lost, grant us, O Lord, the Father, to return to you, as Jesus, our brother, very well knew that he belongs to you, and that he must be in his Father's house. So, dear Mary, intercede for us to return to the Father. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven.
Give us this day our daily bread. Forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us, Lord, from evil.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of your womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit,
As it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen.
O my Jesus, forgive us our sins, save us from the fires of hell, lead all souls to heaven, especially those most in need of thy mercy. Amen. O Mary, Mother of God and our Mother, we bring ourselves under your loving care. Mary, seat of wisdom,
Pray for us.
We'll pray together. Hail, Holy Queen.
Mother of mercy, hail our life, our sweetness, and our hope. To thee do we cry, poor banished children of Eve. To thee do we send up our sighs, mourning and weeping, in this valley of tears. Turn them, most gracious Advocate, thine eyes of mercy towards us, and after this our exile, show unto us the blessed fruit of thy womb, Jesus. O clement, O loving, O most sweet Virgin Mary. Amen.
let us all kneel for the litany. Litany of the Blessed Virgin Mary. Lord, have mercy.
Lord, have mercy.
Christ, have mercy.
Christ, have mercy.
Lord, have mercy.
Lord, have mercy.
Christ, hear us.
Christ, graciously hear us.
God, the Father of heaven,
Have mercy on us.
God, the Son, Redeemer of the world,
Have mercy on us.
God, the Holy Spirit,
Have mercy on us.
Holy Trinity, one God.
Have mercy on us.
Your response will be, pray for us. Holy Mary,
Pray for us.
Holy Mother of God,
Pray for us.
Holy Virgin of Virgins,
Pray for us.
Mother of Christ,
Pray for us.
Mother of divine grace,
Pray for us.
Mother most pure,
Pray for us.
Mother most chaste,
Pray for us.
Mother inviolate,
Pray for us.
Mother undefiled,
Pray for us.
Mother most amiable,
Pray for us.
Mother most admirable,
Pray for us.
Mother of good counsel,
Pray for us.
Mother of our Creator,
Pray for us.
Mother of our Savior,
Pray for us.
Virgin most prudent,
Pray for us.
Virgin most venerable,
Pray for us.
Virgin most renowned,
Pray for us.
Virgin most powerful,
Pray for us.
Virgin most merciful,
Pray for us.
Virgin most faithful,
Pray for us.
Mirror of justice,
Pray for us.
Seat of wisdom,
Pray for us.
Cause of our joy,
Pray for us.
Spiritual vessel,
Pray for us.
Vessel of honor,
Pray for us.
Singular vessel of devotion,
Pray for us.
Mystical rose,
Pray for us.
Tower of David,
Pray for us.
Tower of ivory,
Pray for us.
House of gold,
Pray for us.
Ark of the covenant,
Pray for us.
Gate of heaven,
Pray for us.
Morning star,
Pray for us.
Health of the sick,
Pray for us.
Refuge of sinners,
Pray for us.
Comforter of the afflicted,
Pray for us.
Help of Christians,
Pray for us.
Queen of angels,
Pray for us.
Queen of patriarchs,
Pray for us.
Queen of prophets,
Pray for us.
Queen of apostles,
Pray for us.
Queen of martyrs,
Pray for us.
Queen of confessors,
Pray for us.
Queen of virgins,
Pray for us.
Queen of all saints,
Pray for us.
Queen conceived without original sin,
Pray for us.
Queen assumed into heaven,
Pray for us.
Queen of the most holy rosary,
Pray for us.
Queen of peace,
Pray for us.
Queen of the family,
Pray for us.
spare us, O Lord, Lamb of God, who takes away the sin of the world,
Spare us, O Lord.
graciously hear us, O Lord, Lamb of God, who takes away the sin of the world,
Graciously hear us, O Lord.
have mercy on us. Lamb of God, who takes away the sin of the world,
Have mercy on us.
pray for us, O Holy Mother of God,
that we may be made worthy of the promises of Christ.
let us pray.
Grant, we beseech thee, O Lord God, that we, thy servants, may enjoy perpetual health of mind and body, and by the glorious intercession of the Blessed Mary,
Ever Virgin, be delivered from present sorrow and enjoy eternal happiness through the Christ our Lord. Amen.
Let's say the Memorare together. Remember,
O most gracious Virgin Mary, that never was it known that anyone who fled to thy protection, implored thy help, or sought thy intercession was left unaided. Inspired with this confidence, I fly to thee, O Virgin of Virgins, my Mother. To thee do I come, before thee I stand, sinful and sorrowful. O Mother of the Word incarnate, despise not my petitions, but in thy mercy hear and answer me. Amen.
a special prayer by Pope Francis during this time of pandemic COVID-19. We'll say the prayer together. O
Mary,
You shine continuously on our journey as a sign of salvation and hope. We entrust ourselves to you, health of the sick, who at the foot of the cross were united with Jesus' suffering and persevered in your faith. Protectress of the Roman people, you know our needs, and we know that you will provide, so that, as at Cana in Galilee, joy and celebration may return after this time of trial. Help us, Mother of Divine Love, to conform ourselves to the will of the Father and to do what Jesus tells us. For he took upon himself our suffering and burdened himself with our sorrows to bring us through the cross the joy of resurrection. Amen.
We'll be singing this hymn for how we love.
Oh, how we love Mary, to praise you, honor your name, bless you always. You are the mother of Jesus Christ and mother of humankind. You're the glory of a race, new every morning is your love. Virgin most blessed, you're the song in our hearts, and we will praise you through all eternity. O Mother blessed, for us obtain to love as you love, care as you care. Help us say yes when we are called to serve and do God's will. You're the glory of a race, new every morning is your love. Virgin most blessed, you're the song in our hearts, and we will praise you through all eternity.
Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit.
As it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen.
Virgin Mary,
Pray for us.
Saint Joseph,
Pray for us.
Saint Faustina,
Pray for us.
Saint Mother Teresa,
Pray for us.
Saint Josemaria Escriva.
Pray for us.
Let us make sign of the cross.
In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Thank you, friends, for joining us in this Holy Rosary, and we expect you to join us during this whole month of May till 31st May in this Rosary. And this Holy Rosary will be continued with the Holy Mass.
Good evening, friends. Ace Choir welcomes you to this virtual Holy Mass. This Mass was celebrated in the Archdiocese of Toronto by Father Larry. Before beginning the Mass, I request all of you to keep your phones in silent mode. Thank you. Let's make sign of the cross in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Let's all rise for the entrance hymn.
And who delights to feel His presence.
of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
My dear friends, to celebrate the sacred mysteries, we take a moment to call to mind our sins in life and ask for God's mercy. I confess to Almighty God and to you, my brothers and sisters, that I have greatly sinned in my thoughts and in my words, in what I've done and what I have failed to do, through my fault, through my most grievous fault. Therefore I ask the Blessed Mary, ever Virgin, all the angels and saints, and you, my brothers and sisters, to pray for me to the Lord our God. May Almighty God have mercy on us, forgive us of our sins, and bring all of us to everlasting life. Amen. Let us pray. God, perfect light of the blessed, by whose gift we celebrate the Paschal mysteries on earth, bring us, we pray, to rejoice in the full measure of your grace for ages unending. Through our Lord Jesus Christ, your Son, who lives and reigns with you in the unity of the Holy Spirit, one God, forever and ever. Amen.
In today's first reading, we will get to know that a voice from heaven tells Peter that what God has made clean, you must not call unclean.
First reading from the Acts of the Apostles, chapter 11, verses 1 to 18. Now, the apostles and the believers who were in Judea heard that the Gentiles had also accepted the word of God. So when Peter went up to Jerusalem, the circumcised believers criticized him, saying, "Why did you go to the uncircumcised men and eat with them?" Then Peter began to explain it to them, step by step, saying, "I was in the city of Joppa, praying, and in a trance I saw a vision. There was something like a large sheet coming down from heaven, being lowered by its four corners, and it came close to me. As I looked at it closely, I saw four-footed animals, beasts of prey, reptiles, and birds of the air. I also heard a voice saying to me, 'Get up, Peter, kill and eat.' But I replied, 'By no means, Lord, for nothing profane or unclean has ever entered my mouth. But a second time the voice answered from heaven, what God has made clean, you must not call profane. This happened 3 times. Then everything was pulled up again to heaven. At that very moment, 3 men sent to me from Caesarea arrived at the house where we were. The Spirit told me to go with them and not to make a distinction between them and us. These 6 brothers also accompanied me, and we entered this man's house. He told us how he had seen the angel standing in his house and saying, send to Joppa and bring Simon, who is called Peter. He will give you a message by which you and your entire household will be saved. And as I began to speak, the Holy Spirit fell upon them just as it had upon us at the beginning. And I remembered the word of the Lord, how he had said, John baptized with water, but you will be baptized with the Holy Spirit. If then God gave them the same gift that he gave us when we believed in the Lord Jesus Christ, who was I that I could hinder God? When they heard this, they were silenced. And they praised God, saying, then God has given even to the Gentiles the repentance that leads to life. The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
My soul is thirsting for the living God. My soul is thirsting for the living God. As a deer longs for flowing streams, so my soul thirsts for you, O God. My soul thirsts for God, for the living God. When shall I come and behold the face of God? My soul is thirsting for the living God. Oh, send out your light and your truth, let them lead me. Let them bring me to your holy hill and to your dwelling. My soul is thirsting for the living God. Then I will go to the altar of God, to God my exceeding joy, and I will praise you with a harp, O God, my God. My soul is thirsting for the living God.
Let's rise for acclamation.
Alleluia, alleluia, alleluia. Alleluia, alleluia, alleluia. I am the good shepherd, says the Lord. I know my sheep and mine know me. Alleluia, alleluia, alleluia.
In today's Gospel reading, we will hear that Jesus is the Good Shepherd.
The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to St. John. Glory to you, O Lord. Jesus said to the Pharisees, "Very truly I tell you, anyone who does not enter the sheepfold by the gate, but climbs in by another way, is a thief and a bandit. The one who enters by the gate is the shepherd of the sheep. The gatekeeper opens the gate for him, and the sheep hear his voice. He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. When he has brought out all his own, he goes ahead of them, and the sheep follow him because they know his voice. They will not follow a stranger, but they will run from him because they do not know the voice of strangers." Jesus used this figure of speech with them, but they did not understand what he was saying to them. So again, Jesus said to them, "Very truly I tell you, I am the gate for the sheep. All who come before me are thieves and bandits, but the sheep did not listen to them. I am the gate. Whoever enters by me will be saved, and will come in and go out and find pasture. The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I came that they may have life and have it abundantly." My brothers and sisters in Christ, the gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
My dear friends in Christ, this beautiful passage from St. John's Gospel is one of the 7 titles that Jesus used to describe himself. And it is a wonderful parable of the gatekeeper, the Good Shepherd, and how he cares for his sheep to the point of laying down his life for them. We may ask ourselves when we listen to this passage, do we know the peace and the security of the Good Shepherd who watches over us? As we are aware, the Old Testament speaks of God as the shepherd of his people, Israel. Psalm 23 is one of the most comforting songs that we can appreciate when we read it or when we sing it. For the Good Shepherd leads us in life, and he is present to lead us to heaven upon death. Psalm 80 proclaims, "Give ear, O shepherd of Israel, who will lead Joseph like a flock." Psalm 100 proclaims, "We are his people and the sheep of his pasture." The Messiah is also pictured as the shepherd of God's people. From chapter 40, verse 11 of the prophet Isaiah, we read, "He will feed his flock like a shepherd. He will gather the lambs in his arms." Also from the New Testament, St. Matthew, chapter 18, verse 12, and St. Luke, chapter 15, verse 4, Jesus says he is the Good Shepherd who will risk his life to save the stray sheep. Jesus made 3 very profound promises to his followers. First, he promised them everlasting life. That is, if they accept him and follow him, they will have the life of God within them. Jesus also promised a life that would have no end, for death would not be the end, but the beginning. They would know the glory of indestructible life. Jesus promised a life that was secure. In the funeral mass, we hear these wonderful words, "For your faithful Lord, life is changed, but not ended." Jesus also said that nothing would snatch them out of his hand, not even sorrow or death, since he is everlasting life itself. Our lives are safe within the hands of Christ, our Good Shepherd. As we know, the Pharisees were very much against Jesus, for they claimed that he was saying he was equal to God, and they certainly did not appreciate that. We ourselves must accept Christ as our Lord and Savior, and not listen to the many voices in the past when we read the scriptures, the Pharisees condemning him, but also in the present world where we live. We hear voices saying, Christ is not divine, not the Son of God, because we live in a very secular world. But we know, when we have our faith, that Christ is truly our good shepherd, and he offers us peace and security when we submit our lives totally to him. St. Cyril of Alexandria, who was a 5th century church father, comments on Jesus as our good shepherd. St. Cyril writes, "He shows us in what manner a shepherd may be proved good, and he teaches that he must be prepared to give his life fighting in defense of his sheep, which was fulfilled in Christ. For man has departed from the love of God and fallen into sin, and because of this, I say excluded from the divine abode of paradise. He yielded to the devil, tempting him to sin, and death following that sin, he became prey of fierce and ravenous wolves. But after Christ was announced as the true shepherd of all men, he laid down his life for us, as recorded in the first book of John, chapter 3, verse 16, fighting for us against that pack of the inhuman beast." The end of the quote from St. Cyril of Alexandria. So we may ask ourselves on this day, we hear this wonderful gospel, do we listen to the voice of God? Do we listen to our good shepherd? If we do we obey his word in our actions? Something for us to ponder. My brothers and sisters, we also know that May is the month of our Blessed Mother, Mary. So perhaps we could spend some extra time this month reciting the Holy Rosary, perhaps dusting off the family Bible, and we may look at the 150 magnificent Psalms, read them, pray on them. Perhaps something I would advise you to do in your reading of the scriptures is that I had mentioned that there are 7 expressions of Jesus sharing with us an insight into who he is. They are found in St. John's Gospel. Perhaps, reading at your own leisure, you will discover the other 6. That's your homework. Today in our Gospel, we hear Jesus describe himself as the gatekeeper, the Good Shepherd. I now like to conclude with these prayers of the Blessed Virgin Mary in this month of May, especially this time as Cardinal Collins refers to as our Valley of Tears. Join with me if you would like to. Hail, Holy Queen, Mother of Mercy, our life, our sweetness, and our hope. To you do we cry, poor banished children of Eve. To you do we send up our sighs, mournings, weeping in this valley of tears. Turn then, most gracious Advocate, thine eyes of mercy towards us, and after this our exile, show unto us the blessed fruit of thy womb, Jesus. O clement, O loving, O sweet Virgin Mary. Our second prayer referred to as a memorare. O most gracious Virgin Mary, never was it known that anyone who fled to thy protection, implored thy help, or sought thy intercession was left unaided. Inspired by this confidence, I fly to thee, O Virgin of Virgins, my mother. To thee do I come, before thee I stand, sinful and sorrowful. O Mother of the Word incarnate, despise not my petitions, but in thy mercy hear and answer me. Amen. And now we offer our prayers and our petitions to our Heavenly Father. For the Holy Father, Pope Francis, for our bishops and our priests, and all in leadership roles in the service of our church, we pray to the Lord. Lord, hear our prayer. For peace in our world and within our own hearts, we pray to the Lord. Lord, hear our prayer. For all of those in our daily TV Mass who have asked to be included in our prayer intentions book, especially for those asking for peace within their own families, for this we pray to the Lord. Lord, hear our prayer. For the faithful departed, especially members of our family and close friends, may they rest in the light of the Good Shepherd. We pray to the Lord. Lord, hear our prayer. And for our own personal intentions known to God and ourselves alone, we pray to the Lord.
Lord, hear our prayer.
Heavenly Father, we give you thanks for all your gifts and blessings as we present our prayers to you through your Son, our Lord Jesus Christ, who lives and reigns with you in the Holy Spirit, one God, forever and ever. Amen.
All that I am, all that I have, I lay them down before you, oh Lord. All my regrets, all my acclaims, the joy and the pain, I'm making them yours. Lord, I offer my life to you, everything I've been through. Use it for your glory. Lord, I offer my days to you, lifting my praise to you as a pleasing sacrifice. Lord, I offer you my life. Things in the past, things yet unseen, wishes and dreams that are yet to come true. All of my hopes, all of my plans, my heart and my hands are lifted to you. Lord, I offer my life to you, everything I've been through. Use it for your glory. Lord, I offer my days to you, lifting my praise to you as a pleasing sacrifice. Lord, I offer you my life.
Pray, brothers and sisters, that my sacrifice and yours may be acceptable to God, the Almighty Father.
May the Lord accept the sacrifice at your hands for the praise and glory of his name, for our church and good of all.
Receive, O Lord, we pray, these offerings of your exultant church, and as you have given her cause for such great gladness, grant also that the gifts we bring may bear fruit in perpetual happiness through Christ our Lord.
Amen.
The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit,
Lift up your hearts.
lift them up to the Lord.
Let us give thanks to the Lord our God.
It is right and just.
It is truly right and just, our duty and our salvation at all times to acclaim you, O Lord, but in this time above all to laud you yet more gloriously when Christ our Passover has been sacrificed. He never ceases to offer himself for us, but defends us and ever pleads our cause before you. He is the sacrificial victim who dies no more, the Lamb once slain who lives forever. Therefore, overcome with paschal joy, every land, every people exults in your praise. And even the heavenly powers with the angelic host sing together the unending hymn of your glory as they acclaim.
Holy, holy, holy.
are indeed holy, O Lord, the fount of all holiness. Make holy, therefore, these gifts, we pray, by sending down your Spirit upon them like the dewfall, so that they may become for us the body and the blood of our Lord Jesus Christ. At the time he was betrayed and entered willingly into his passion, he took bread and giving thanks broke it and gave it to his disciples, saying, "Take this, all of you, and eat of it, for this is my body, which will be given up for you."
My Lord, my God.
In a similar way, when supper was ended, he took the chalice. Once more giving thanks, he gave it to his disciples, saying, "Take this, all of you, and drink from it, for this is the chalice of my blood, the blood of the new and eternal covenant, which will be poured out for you and for many for the forgiveness of sins. Do this in memory of me."
My Lord, my God.
The mystery of faith.
We proclaim your death, O Lord, and profess your resurrection until you come again.
Therefore, as we celebrate the memorial of his death and resurrection, we offer you, Lord, the bread of life and the chalice of salvation, giving thanks that you have held us worthy to be in your presence and minister to you. Humbly we pray that, partaking of the body and blood of Christ, we may be gathered into one by the Holy Spirit. Remember, Lord, your church spread throughout the world, and bring it to the fullness of charity, together with Francis our Pope, and Thomas our Bishop, and all the clergy. Remember also our brothers and sisters who have fallen asleep in the hope of the resurrection, and all who have died in your mercy. Welcome them into the light of your face. Have mercy on us all, we pray. And with the Blessed Virgin Mary, Mother of God, with blessed Joseph, her spouse, with the blessed apostles and all the saints who have pleased you throughout the ages, we may merit to be co-heirs to eternal life, and may praise and glorify you through your Son, Jesus Christ. Through him, with him, and in him, O God, Almighty Father, in the unity of the Holy Spirit, all glory and honor is yours forever and ever.
Amen.
At the Savior's command, informed by divine teaching, we dare to say,
Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread. Forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us, Lord, from evil.
Deliver us, Lord, we pray, from every evil. Graciously grant peace in our days, that by the help of your mercy we may be always free from sin and safe from all distress, as we await the blessed hope and the coming of our Savior, Jesus Christ.
For
the kingdom and the power and the glory are yours, now and forever. Lord Jesus Christ, who said to his apostles, "Peace I leave you, my peace I give you," look not on our sins, but on the faith of your church, and graciously grant her peace and unity in accordance with your will, who live and reign forever and ever.
Amen.
Peace of the Lord be with you always.
And with your spirit. Lamb of God, you take away the sin of the world, have mercy on us. Lamb of God, you take away the sin of the world, have mercy on us. Lamb of God, you take away the sin of the world, grant us peace.
Behold, the Lamb of God. Behold him who takes away the sins of the world, and blessed are those called to the supper of the Lamb. Lord, I am not worthy that you should enter under my roof, but only say the word, and my soul shall be healed. Bring us to everlasting life.
Amen.
since we cannot receive the Holy Communion now, let us remember our first Holy Communion and also the best moment when we received the body and blood of Christ. Remembering that, let us partake in the spiritual communion by saying this prayer. O Immaculate Queen of heaven and earth, Mother of God and Mediator of every grace, I believe that your dearly beloved Son, our Lord Jesus Christ, is truly, really, and substantially contained in the most holy sacrament. I love him above all things and long to receive him in my heart. Since now I cannot receive him sacramentally, be so good to place him spiritually in my soul and never permit me to be separated from him. Amen. Shepherd of my soul, I give you full control. Wherever you may lead, I will follow. I have made say the prayer after communion of Saint Thomas Aquinas. I thank you, Lord, Almighty Father, everlasting God, for having me pleased, through no merit of mine, but of your great mercy alone, to feed me a sinner and your unworthy servant with the precious body and blood of your Son, our Lord Jesus Christ. I pray that this Holy Communion may not be for my judgment and condemnation, but for my pardon and salvation. Let this Holy Communion be to me an armor of faith and a shield of goodwill, a cleansing of all vices, and a rooting out of all evil desires. May it increase love and patience, humility and obedience, and all virtues. May it be a firm defense against the evil designs of all my visible and invisible enemies, a perfect quieting of all the desires of soul and body. May this Holy Communion bring about a perfect union with you, the one true God, and at last enable me to reach eternal bliss. When you will call me, I pray that you bring me a sinner to the indescribable feast, where you, with your Son and the Holy Spirit, are to your saints true light, full blessedness, everlasting joy, and perfect happiness, through the same Christ our Lord. Amen. Let us say the prayer for priest of Saint Therese of Lisieux. O Jesus, eternal priest, keep your priests within the shelter of your sacred heart, where none may touch them. Keep unstained their anointed hands, which daily touch your sacred body. Keep unsullied their lips, daily purpled with your precious blood. Keep pure and unearthly their hearts, sealed with the sublime mark of the priesthood. Let your holy love surround them and shield them from the world's contagion. Bless their labors with abundant fruit, and may the souls to whom they minister be their joy and consolation, here and in heaven, their beautiful and everlasting crown. Amen.
Let us pray. Look with kindness upon your people, O Lord, and grant, we pray, that those you were pleased to renew by eternal mysteries may attain in their flesh the incorruptible glory of the resurrection through Christ our Lord.
Amen.
The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
May Almighty God bless you, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
The Mass is ended. Go in peace. Alleluia, alleluia.
Thanks be to God. Alleluia, alleluia.
He will
Lord Jesus, we give ourselves to you, our whole self to you. Help us, Lord, as you are the shepherd and we are the sheep. Help us, Lord, that we can listen to your voice. Every time we can make a choice to listen to your voice, and we can say to you, to our own self, that wherever you may lead, I will go. Help us, Lord, that we can say yes to your voice, and we may never doubt that if we are saying yes to your voice, then where we will go, what will happen, will not help us, Lord, that we may not think of the future, but that yes, Lord, we can say that the simple word yes to you, and we can build that trust in you that wherever you will lead, wherever you will lead, it will be adventurous, but it will be good for us. Mama Mary, do intercede for us that we may always say yes to the voice, the spirit that is inside us. For this we pray, our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread.
Forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us, Lord, from evil. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. We'll say the Memorare together. Remember, O most gracious Virgin Mary, that never was it known that anyone who fled to thy protection, implored thy help, or sought thy intercession, was left unaided. Inspired with this confidence, I fly to thee, O Virgin of Virgins. My Mother, to thee do I come. Before thee I stand, sinful and sorrowful. O Mother of the Word incarnate, despise not my petitions, but in thy mercy hear and answer me. Amen. O Queen of Heaven, rejoice now. Alleluia. Rejoice, for he who married no despair. Alleluia. He is risen as he foretold. Alleluia. Pray for us to the Father. Alleluia. Rejoice and be glad, O Virgin Mary. Alleluia. For the Lord has truly risen. Alleluia. Let us pray. O God, you deem to give joy to the world through the resurrection of your Son, our Lord Jesus Christ. Grant, we beseech you, that through his mother, the Virgin Mary, we may obtain the joy of everlasting life. Through the same Christ our Lord. Amen. Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit,
As it was in the beginning,
is now and ever shall be, world without end. Amen. Virgin Mary, pray for us. Saint Joseph, pray for us. Saint Faustina, pray for us. Saint Jose Maria Escriva,
pray for us.
Saint Dominic, pray for us. Let's make sign of the cross. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Thank you, friends, for joining us in this virtual Holy Mass. Have a blessed evening ahead. Stay safe and take precautions. Tomorrow also we are doing rosary at 5 o'clock in the evening.